and I started WorkStream nonprofit. Our goal is to help organizations run as efficiently as they can. And we have a focus on anything operations related. So whether it is process design, fractional COO, bookkeeping, operations, we're here to help you. And one of our core beliefs is that if we can provide education, just provide a little bit of knowledge, connect it to the right pieces of information, the right people, then there's a lot that you can do on your own to make your organization more impactful. So that's why we started this webinar series to give you access to experts with all the information that you need to be your best leaders and your best selves and lead the organization well. We very much believe in accountability. So you'll find that I will be sending out an email afterwards in a week to find out if you did your action items. I don't want people to just listen and then, it goes in one ear out the other. The way to make the most of this is to take action and to do things. So as we go through it, we're going to have action items for you to take the information that our providers here are giving you and make the most of it. As we go through the session, we're going to have 4 parts. Phase 1 is going to be about getting the right candidates. Then we're moving into phase 2, which is performance management. Then phase 3 is about being an effective leader. And phase 4 is fostering and maintaining a healthy culture. So as we go through them, you're going to have an action item for each one, plus one general thing at the end to take away. And that's what we're going to follow up with. We try to make our webinars as engaging as we can. So we do have polls and things that we're going to be asking you for throughout it. So the more you participate, the more you're going to take away from that. So that being said, I'm going to switch it over to our presenters so that they can give you intros about who they are and what they do so that you have some context when we get through the rest of that. So we're just going to go in the order of how I have it on my screen. Tanya, let's start off with you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tanya Luna. I am part of an organization called Scarlet Spark, and we provide free leadership development and organizational health support to animal advocacy organizations. My background is in organizational psychology. I've also grown an organization, led an organization that grew to 150 people. So I always say I try to blend the psychology with the kind of practical experience.
Nice. Thank you, Tanya, for joining us today. And Kristen.
Hi, all. I'm Kristen Berger. I'm the president and founder of Berger HR Solutions. We provide outsourced HR support to professional service firms and nonprofits. I've been in HR for almost 20 years and 10 of those in consulting. And similarly, my team as well has all been in HR for a significant period of time. So, we really love passing along some of the best practices that we've learned over the years to folks like you. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us today, Kristen. Ashley.
Hi, I'm Ashley Brown. I'm the Director of People and Culture for Canoe Collective. We support nonprofits with strengthening their operations and human resources and finance systems. I have about 10 years, or I'm sorry, time is flying, 12 years in the HR and operations space, and I am newer to consulting and working with partners. I've been doing that for about a year.
Nice. Amruza.
Hi, my name is Amruza. I'm a leadership coach. I work primarily in the animal protection space, though I work with folks across the gamut. Before being a leadership coach, I was a founder and executive director of a nonprofit that worked at the intersection of racial equity and animal protection. And so I have some lived experience and some professional experience to draw from here.
Nice, thank you. And Adam.
Hey everyone, my name is Adam. I'm a leadership coach as well. My background is in big tech mostly. So I worked in big tech for about 14 years. The majority of that was as a tech leader, sort of manager and manager of other managers. And that's where I gained kind of this passion for leadership and organizational culture, one topic I'm really excited to talk about. And so as my career in big tech sort of wound down, I launched a leadership coaching business for people trying to do the most good that they can in their lives. And I recently launched a new project called Raise Impact, which is specifically targeted towards AI safety organizations and making sure that that we provide services to them in people management and leadership to help them have even more impact than they are today.
Nice. And Laura is our operations and project manager. We are so grateful to have her on our team, and she'll be the one taking notes as we go through this. So you have a visual also. And she is in charge of our polls and things like that. So thank you all for being here. So first thing we're going to ask you is we have a poll of questions for you of what are the most relevant topics for you. We're going to try to tailor the rest of the session based on what's most relevant, what you're most eager on hearing. So Laura, if you can put that poll out, or I can do that too, right?
That's on your end.
That is on my end. All right. So organizational priorities. Okay. Do you all see the poll? Okay, great. We touched drove it yesterday, but fascinating seeing these percentages shift as we get all our responses. All right, it looks like we have office culture being pretty top of mind for everybody, leadership training, and our hiring process and performance management as our focus areas. All right, so thank you all for that. Okay, so we're going to get into our getting the right candidates. So this is probably going to incorporate the hiring process. How do we get you the right people? In order to have the most impact, in order to get things done, you need to identify what it is that needs to happen. You need to create a job description. You need to recruit, you need to hire, and you need to onboard. It's a pretty extensive process. Um, so I'm curious from those of you who have been doing hiring, what's your biggest challenges? Put it in the chat. If you have any specific challenges in hiring. Laura, probably now we can start the whiteboarding. And Kristen, I think you're probably going to be our biggest expert on here. What do you see as the biggest challenges with getting the right candidates?
So there's a couple things I find, though, what I see the most often, especially with our nonprofit clients, is not really knowing what they're looking for going into the search process. And I find, it's very hard to find the right person if you don't actually know what you're looking for. So to your point, Dina, one thing we highly suggest, I find so many of our nonprofit clients get really excited. Oh, we have the funding for this job and just get it out there. And, I'd really encourage you to take some time and thought to think through what are the key tasks that we need this person to be responsible for. So then you can figure out what are the skill sets that we're looking for, what's the experience or the education, prior work that they've done. But then also to pause not just on the skills, but also think about culturally, what do we need that's going to be the right culture fit for our organization? What are some of the soft skills that we would want this person to have? What's some of the experience that, would balance out our team well? And then from there, once you know what the soft skills and the hard skills that you need, really create a job description. It might be a work in progress. Yes, you might make changes to it, but at least start with a job description. And then from there, it's a lot easier to start being intentional in your search. So thinking about, okay, based on these skill sets, where should we post this job? Based on what we're looking for, what interview questions that we should ask. I know we're limited on time, and this is something I could talk about probably for the full hour.
Probably.
But one of the things, like a best practice that I would recommend is this is an area where AI, ChatGPT can be extremely, extremely helpful. So, I will sometimes start out with a job description, just putting out rough bullet points of here's the technical skills that we need, here's the soft skills that we need, here's the title of the position, the industry, here's information about our organization. Please create a job description. And it's amazing how close it can get. Yes, you still want to read it and edit it, but I find it saves a lot of time. The other thing that I will do once I've created that job description is then I will ask, if I feel good about the job description, could you please turn this into a job posting that will attract great candidates. Because what a lot of people do is they'll take the job description and post it. And quite honestly, like you have to remember when you're posting it, it's really you're trying to attract candidates. And job descriptions usually aren't something that would attract a candidate. They're more factual. They don't necessarily give the value proposition or why someone would want to work with your organization. So I find, again, getting that job description that's good for an employee once they start, but then also having it turn into a job posting. Then from there, it's really making sure that you post it in appropriate places. I mean, I know some of you probably have go-to places that you post based on your organization, but there's a lot of different great sites out there that you can post on, both in the nonprofit space as well as just the general business space. And so I find like that slowing down that process, not just going straight from getting the approval to posting, putting some time and thought into it, really make sure that you're set up for success and that you don't waste time looking to fill a position that isn't really the position that you're looking to fill.
Yeah, a lot of times, Kristen, you're right on with that. I usually recommend that people like take a look at what is the work that you actually need to do. What are the soft skills? What are the hard skills? And then turning that into the job description, which then also will then turn into performance metrics and evaluation. So it's very strongly connected.
Yeah.
Now, one thing, so looking at the comments, there are a few things that we had also thought about that are questions. Um, Nonprofits struggle with pay. Like we cannot pay
Yes.
top market. So
Yes.
how do you create an employee value proposition? That was one thing that I learned as I was preparing for this to make jobs attractive. And how can everybody here walk away with maybe thinking about how can they create some kind of template for themselves that will be attractive to prospective employees?
So I was in terms of nonprofits, like what you don't have in dollars, you have in your why and your purpose. And I think sometimes it's easy, we're in such a money-driven culture. We forget, like many of us are not motivated by money. We're motivated by a sense of purpose and what we're giving back to the community, or something that we're extremely passionate about. I know we have a lot of animal protection individuals on this call. So like that's where I think that job posting is so important. Because, for example, if you had a director of ops job description that's just a generic director of ops job description, you post it out there, that's not necessarily, and especially if it's, oh, this seems like a really large position and they're offering 50K. No one's necessarily going to jump on that. Where, I find for the job postings, it's getting that value proposition or the why in there, talking about your mission, talking about what's special about your team, talking about any additional perks that you're able to offer. I know many of our nonprofits might not be able to offer top dollar like some of our professional service firms, but they have great company cultures that they can highlight. Different activities that they do as a team, flexibility in their schedules. So that's where that job posting is really important, because it's really the message that you're sending out to candidates on the why. Like, why would you want to come and work for our organization? And I know as nonprofit organizations, many of you have very compelling whys. Make sure that you capitalize on that.
Okay, thank you. So that's actually going to be one of your homework items, everyone, that you are going to write a template job description, which captures the why, which makes it exciting for somebody to take to engage with you. Now, I have another follow-up question on hiring. Interviewing. I mean, I know I have my own philosophy about how you should be interviewing people. If you post a job on ADK, I don't know how many of you here have done that, but you will get over 100 applicants, which is great. We are doing a great job connecting people to high impact positions. How do you manage that? I know how I do it. What I do it is that I create a set of questions that are a little bit of screening to begin with. And to the point about LLMs, yes, if somebody starts off with, I bring a unique combination, you know right away that their answer was written by uh, some kind of LLM. And then I don't know, it's not like I'm not hearing the person as well. So I try to put in a set of questions that I can use as those screenings, so I can just sift through everybody who answer this very weakly, and do one question at a time. But we also want to do questions that aren't really Well, Kristen, I'll let you more talk about this. What are good interview questions and things that you can be putting into this, both the screening process and the hiring process, to make it fair, to make it equitable, to make sure you're hiring right, that you're non-biased? How do you usually approach that?
So in terms of the screening questions, when you post, you want to be careful because sometimes you could knock out candidates who would be a really great candidate for experience that you're putting into that question that you don't actually require. So like, I've had people that put in, I want 10 years of experience. And, honestly, there's employees. And again, some of this is a gender. There's actually studies that show women are more likely to say, well, I only have 8 years of experience, so I'm not going to apply for this position. And so, I think one, if you do put those knockout questions in, you want to make sure that those knockout questions are legitimate knockout questions. Things that it's like if this person says they don't have this experience, they don't have this certification, they really cannot do this job. Once you get the resumes, I do know it's very time consuming. I'm a business owner of a small team or a team of 8. It's very, very hard for us to take the time to take ourselves out of consulting so we have to be really, really efficient. And some of the ways that we do that is one, again, being really clear on what it is that we're looking for so that when we do get those 100 resumes, we can easily shrink it down to maybe a list of the top 10. We then usually have our firm administrator help with doing phone screens for us. So just 15-minute phone screens with each of those, say, those top 10 candidates to see, are they pleasant? Do they have good communication skills? When she asks, like, hey, this is the salary that range for the position, does that work for you? I mean, there's some people who knock themselves out then. They'll say, no, I really need to make 10K, 20K more than that. And so, she can maybe take that list of 10 down to 3 or 4. And then that is when our director of consulting will step in to really do the full blown interviews. And my biggest tip with that is really make sure that you make the most of your time. It's really easy to get off track in interviews, and talk about things not necessarily related to the job. You want to make sure you have questions ahead of time. And so again, that's where that prep comes, because once you have prep you have the job description, I'm pretty good at coming up with behavioral based questions, but I will even say, hey, ChatGPT, based on this job description, what are some behavioral based, and that's the important part, behavioral based questions that I could ask candidates to discern whether or not they're a good fit for this job. And
Can you
some of
give
you
us
might
an
know,
example of a behavioral based question?
so behavioral based questions are questions that are asking specifically about past experiences, because truly to find out, how someone's going to best predict how someone will function in the future, it's best to know how they've functioned in the past. And if you ask general questions like, "Hey, tell me about your work ethic," any well-trained interviewer is going to paint themselves in a positive light. So what I will do, say for example, if I'm interviewing a project manager, tell me about a project that was difficult, that maybe didn't go the way that you expected. Tell me about that project and how you saw it through to the end. So what that's telling me, and if they try to give me a more general, like, oh, I've worked on many projects. No, no, no. Can you please give me a specific project? Because what I'm looking for is to hear what they've done, how they actually acted in that situation, how they overcame the challenges that they may have faced. If they took a team versus an I approach. Really, I'm looking to hear, the story of how they've behaved in the past. And it's amazing the information that you can get out of candidates if you ask the right questions and get them talking about past experiences.
Yeah. I like to integrate those kinds of questions also in the screening form initially when people are applying. Tell me
Mhm.
about a time when you blank, because that's not something that ChatGPT can generate for them. They have to give you their story. And maybe it'll help with the wording, but it's not going to come up with a story. I also like including open-ended questions like, what's your preferred work style? There's no right
Mhm.
or wrong answer, but those kinds of things can help screen that. Yeah, in work tests, you do just have to be a little smarter about them in order to make it something that you can hack. My personal opinion is that they're going to be working using ChatGPT or Claude or whatever it is in their work. So if they're using it as a tool, then that's fine. It will help them screen them. All right, Kristen, the last question I have for you before we move on to another topic, and I know there's so much more to cover in each of these, so we will have Q&A at the end if anyone has specific questions on this. But how do you check for a culture fit?
So that's where, again, I think asking good behavioral questions, because you can figure out like how does this person actually behave or respond to different things that may happen in the office. So, like, hey, what are some of your biggest pet peeves? And if three of the pet peeves that they have are things that happen in your office on a regular basis, maybe they're not the right fit. Really getting them to talk about their preferences, their experience. But also, I think a lot of it is like knowing your culture, which I know we're going to talk about. But,
Mhm.
I always say, like, when I'm interviewing, for example, in our professional services side, we have a lot of law firms, and a candidate could be a great fit for one law firm, but I know they're going to be a terrible fit for another law firm. And it's so much of it is just really being honest about your culture, who you are, who's going. Yes, you want there's a trap because I'm like, you don't want everyone to be the same. You want a diverse workplace, but you want to make sure that some of your core values and way of being are similar in the office. The other thing that I always recommend is that you have multiple people in the office talk to a candidate, especially a final candidate, even if it's for 15 minutes. One, because then you can get the opinion of different people in the office. But two, it also gives the candidate a good feel for, is this a team that I would want to be a part of? Because I think sometimes we forget it's a two-way street. Yes, we're analyzing candidates, trying to decide if they're a good fit, but like they're trying to decide if we're a good fit too. And they should have the ability to get a good feel for the office culture and what it would be like if they actually worked in the job. And I find that way, if you're very honest, you give them a full picture, you have them meet with multiple members of the staff, that kind of has a way of attracting the right candidates, but repelling the wrong ones.
Yeah.
Because if you're giving them that honest view, there's some people who are going to say, this is great, this is wonderful, this is exactly where I want to work. And, there's some people who say, this might not really be the right fit for me. And that's why I always encourage clients to be honest and authentic. Don't try to make it seem like your office is all roses and rainbows, because I think we all know every office has its challenges. And I find being honest about those things really makes sure that you get those right people.
Okay, thank you, Kristen.
Huh?
That was very helpful. So your action items again are going to be to create your unique value proposition. Why do people want to work with you that you can include in your job postings going forward? So we're going to put that in the summary for that. We are going to move on to our next section, which is about performance management. That I think really probably all of you have some things to contribute on that. But I think Ashley is probably our more resident expert with that. But we're going to try to pull everybody in here. So I want to hear some case studies, right? So we've gone through the hiring process, right? Think we have an excellent hire. We onboard them. And sometimes it doesn't work out. Do you have any stories that you can share about an employee who went through a great hiring process, but then they weren't managed properly and it didn't work out?
Yes.
Ashley?
I do. I do. The story that stands out for me is someone who was brought in a coaching role. So they were working with communities as a coach. They had a phenomenal hiring process. The role was really competency based. So the hiring process was aligned with sourcing out those competencies, leaning on those behavioral based questions and work tests to make sure that the person could perform well in the job. But then the stumbles started happening once the person was on board, and they were not so much onboarded as they were given a trial by fire. And really just had to dive off of the deep end and applying those skills in a brand new context. And so I think there was some degree of performance management that was happening, but at the same time, this was not a backfilled position. This was a scaled position. So generally for nonprofits, that means your team is already stretched. And I think there was a challenge with just delivering good and consistent performance management. And so unfortunately, at the 9 month mark, roughly, that person was exited out of the organization. And I use this example because I'm gratefully still in touch with this person, and they have a really successful career working in the same competencies and working with organizations of similar missions, and they seem to be doing really well. So for me, the signal is how can the organization strengthen their performance management to make sure that they're able to retain this kind of talent, and that happened several years ago, and it was actually a jumping off point for putting in practice really good performance management. Happy to say the organization that I'm referencing here has a stellar performance management, and I'm not just saying that because I built it, but it was really a lesson, I think, for them in having one of those positions turn over at around the 9-month mark, whereas the average tenure for someone in that role at that time was upwards of 5 years.
Well, okay. Audience, have you ever had any kind of similar situation? What do you think should have happened here? What would you do if they were in your company? You can post it in the chat. No ideas. Okay.
That's one.
Tanya, what would you do?
Yeah, so I think probably step one, well, you said onboarding by fire, right? Was of course one of the first challenges. Um, so I would say first and foremost, take a look at the onboarding process, and I think this is one of those things that connected to leadership development, which I know came up as a need. Ideally, it starts actually even before day one, where before the person joins, there is both that role description that Kristen was talking about and a conversation about that role description uh, for any role, but especially for leaders. Here's what leadership means to us. Here are the expectations. Any questions, any challenges, anything that you want to make sure that we are clear on before your first day. And then, of course, during the first day, it sounds like one of the big challenges was that the end kind of didn't happen for 9 months. And I always think, we can have the best hiring process ever, but sometimes we're just still not going to be right, even if we do have a great onboarding process. So, step one, have a great onboarding process. Step two, be prepared and ready and kind of okay with the fact that sometimes it's just not a great fit. We just want to catch that early for everyone's benefit. And so I think of it as when someone is brand new, we have daily check ins, maybe for the first 2 weeks, 15 minutes. Hey, what was exciting? What was challenging? What's unclear? And then ideally monthly for the first 3 months, there's a very serious, how's it going? Let's do a retrospective. Is this a fit? Um, I always think that ideally by 3 months in, we can make a serious decision if it's not a good fit. Usually, it's very surprising if you don't know 3 months in that it wasn't quite the right call. And if we're open to that process the entire way, then it's not quite so heartbreaking and stressful if we both know we're going into this, and where we all know we're going into this trying to make it work, but really open to giving each other that two-sided feedback if it just turns out that it wasn't a great fit.
I know a lot of people do like the first 90 days is an introductory period so that if you
Mhm.
have those check-ins, you have those clear metrics, you know how to have those conversations about how they're performing. And by the end of those 90 days, it should be pretty clear. Okay, so similarly, let's say you have an employee and they're not doing so well, and you now have the choice to either figure out how to turn around that underperforming employee or to let them go. How would you handle this situation? Ideally, we want to keep the employees, right? Nobody likes to let people go. It is not great for morale. It's not great for the company. We want everybody to succeed. So, do any of you have a story about how you had an underperforming employee and then how they were turned around? Probably Ashley or Kristen. I would guess you probably have the best stories.
I do. This is another one of my favorites. So this person has gone on to do really amazing things. They were brought on as a project coordinator and had a project management skill set and background, but sometimes it's challenging to do project management in a program environment. And so they were kind of building the plane as they were flying it, building relationships, and just trying to do great work. But there was a lot of scope creep in the job itself. So project coordinator became events coordinator, general logistics, administrative assistant. And I was this person's manager, not initially, but about three to 6 months in. And we just looked at the job description, we looked at the excess, and we realized that these are core functions that need to take place, but they're not actually what's driving and motivating this person to do their job well and get to the core parts of their job. So we came up with a plan to systematize and automate whatever we could to build really good systems so that the more in the weeds parts of the job that weren't so oriented towards project management could flow, but weren't so time intensive. And so it took us about 3 months to just quiet the noise and get that person to be able to focus in on just project management and moving strategy forward. And over the course of about 5 years, they found themselves in upward positions and went on to work for a cool Fortune 100 company in their leadership. So, yeah.
What I'm hearing is probably a lot of what we're going to touch upon in culture, and that is that you have a supportive leaders, people who are there to help you out, who are motivated to be partners in this all, and we'll get onto that in the culture section. Kristen, if you were designing an ideal performance management system, which is going to be everybody's homework, we're going to be creating a performance evaluation plan. What would you tell people to include? So this hopefully should cover our onboarding, the 30, 60, 90-day checks. What should it look like?
Yeah, I think one of the things we see is so much when people think of performance management, they think of the latter stages. So, like when you are putting someone on a performance improvement plan or going to a termination, but really the real work is upfront. So the real work, is, and you can obviously cover a lot of things with one activity, but like having a job description is so key because especially in the nonprofit world, I find so many candidates come in not really knowing exactly what their job is. And it's really hard to do your job well if you don't really know what the scope of your job is to begin with. So I find having that job description, having some in the first, to your point, Dina, having an onboarding plan, making sure in the first couple weeks that you're training them in all the most important aspects of their job, checking in with them on a regular basis, having the, daily one-on-ones to then weekly to then monthly one-on-ones so that there's a plan, there's full support, that's happening. Because I find, if I know a client has a solid job description, they've appropriately onboarded and trained someone, the managers and the leaders are having regular one-on-ones, and someone still isn't doing well at that 90-day mark, it's usually because either they don't have the right attitude, which those ones tend to be the most obvious of, this person just isn't even trying, or this person is really putting forth a good faith effort, but they may just not be the right fit for the job. And I find, that makes it a lot easier. Like what's hard is when I have a client come to us in 3 to 6 months and say, well, this person's not working out. And we're like, well, what did you do to onboard this person, train this person? And it's pretty evident that there's been very little that has been done. Where I find if you make that effort, it's a lot easier as a manager to say, you know what, we've done all of the right things, we've done our due diligence. This person just truly isn't the right fit. And I also find you get a better response from the employee because usually if you've been having those one-on-ones and the training and everything, by the time you get to a termination, there really shouldn't be any surprises. And that's really what I say performance management should be all about is no surprises, very clear expectations, clear support. And it's really just about having regular and honest communication two ways. The other thing that I'll say before I hop off on is for nonprofits specifically. I find our nonprofits are usually the most hesitant to fire people. I have people who want to fire people too fast. I have clients who want to fire too slow. A lot of times, fire too slow is from the nonprofit space, very kind hearted, want to give people a chance. And that's why I say make sure you're setting yourself up so you feel confident that you've done everything you can. That makes it easier to make the decision to terminate. Um, and then also it just makes it, if you feel like, okay, we've done all of these things, these expectations are clear, this person just isn't performing, it makes it easier to make that decision, especially because in your small world, it's impacting other employees. It's one of the things I tell clients all the time. I'm like, I know that it's hard to terminate this employee, but think about the other 6 employees that are impacted because this person just isn't up to speed. And so, like, think of those 6 people when you're making this decision, not just the one. And I find that helps a lot of our nonprofit clients overcome those difficult conversations, and putting someone on a performance plan or terminating.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to
Okay.
follow up, discuss with that. Like, what do you do with volunteers? But I don't think we have time to talk about that. If people are
Yeah.
really
Can I?
passionate about it.
I was just going to say, can I add like a quick teeny tiny thing to what Kristen said?
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that so deeply resonates. I was just going to share maybe like a slight frame shift that might be helpful to some folks. I think sometimes when we think about performance management, I personally don't want to be managed, and most people don't want to manage others. So I sometimes think that just making the shift of like performance enablement,
Hmm.
in other words, it's not my job to manage people and make people do things, but it is my job to be super clear about what I'm expecting and then to figure out what are we able to do to enable that performance.
I like
Um,
that.
so just even the mindset shift, I think sometimes is helpful because oftentimes managers or leaders are like, I'm failing because this person isn't doing their job versus, well, have I enabled them to do their job? Which means clarity, which means training to a reasonable degree that your organization can afford. And then maybe one other quick addition to what you were saying, Kristen and Ashley, is I, I think oftentimes when we think about clarity, we see people have quite clear role descriptions, but there's no definition of what does success look like if these tasks are completed. And if we're thinking through that lens of performance enablement, all of it then can become so much clearer if we get clear on how will we know that this person is achieving the purpose of their role. Um, and then we don't have to be so, prescriptive about specifically what they do. We can give them some of that coaching and support to figure that out, as long as we're all clear on how will we know that this person has been successful.
I like those ideas. So thank you, Tanya. How often would you suggest like having those conversations about performance enablement and if they're meeting their success metrics?
Me?
Tanya, yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, I think a lot of it depends on the how quickly that data becomes available. We work with some organizations where maybe they're doing something in academia, for example, and it takes a really long time to know if you've been successful, and maybe they can be a little slower. Like Adam, I also used to work in tech. There, they would have 1 week, 2 week sprints, right? Because things flow quickly enough that you can have that information. I think for most of the majority of our clients, we recommend a monthly check-in, where it could be one-on-one, it could be as a team. At Scarlet Spark, we do monthly, hey, did we hit the goals that we set for ourselves? And what goals are we setting this next month? And then a quarterly, like slower pause and retrospective of what's working, what's not working well. Are we still on track for our annual objectives? So I like quick check-in, 10 minutes monthly, weekly one-on-ones or bi-weekly, to just say, hey, do you need anything? How can I support you through coaching, through feedback? Quarterly, let's pause, and then annually, let's get really clear on what will success look like for the year for us. But I wouldn't make it prescriptive because it really depends on the pacing and the speed at which an organization can learn whether it is achieving its goals.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right, let's move on to our next topic. I know we have so much to cover in each of these, so maybe at some point we'll blow each of these out into its own session. Becoming an effective leader. First of all, how many of you got formal management or training before you became responsible for managing others? Quick thumbs up if you did. Which I don't see very many. Most people don't have that, and they're just put into this situation. And that's why it's really important to have people to help you become better leaders and managers. So, Adam, a lot of times people are promoted into the position of being managers. and they were good at being good contributors, but they don't have this management training. How would you advise people to not make this kind of mistake? And if people are in this situation, what do you do to help them?
Yeah, that's such a good one. Yeah, I think the model here that may be helpful is just to really separate, well, two things. The first one that comes to mind is to really separate leadership ability and sort of like uh, people management ability from being a really, really good individual contributor or whatever technical excellence looks like within their role. Those are two sort of different things. And so your model going in should respect the fact that those are two pretty different things. Of course, you might be in a good position to coach someone on something technical if you have that expertise. But really, it's useful to separate them because then you can know, okay, if someone's going to become a leader, do they have that skill? And then that goes to the next thing, which is, do they actually have the desire to be a leader? Like, I think one of the biggest dysfunctions here is someone is just like promoted because they're just like, oh, I guess this is the obvious thing for me to do because I was really good at this, and now I'm being promoted, and now I'm in this. And like my manager said, it was a good idea, and maybe I can have more impact this way. And but there was never like a really facilitated conversation by the manager, the person who was that person's manager, about like, what do you actually want to do? Do you want to be a people manager, or do you want to grow as a leader, and is that in your career plan? And so I think that like both the desire really needs to be clarified. And then if that conversation is happening, can be initiated by the person who's already the manager in the situation. um, but with everyone in the team, go out and find out what people really want, so that you proactively know who are the people in this team who may be interested and may be able to grow those skills to be really effective leaders. So then when it comes time to really need someone to step into that role, then you can say, how do we get people in that place? How do we provide them these sort of opportunities to gain these sorts of skills? Which is a really interesting question. That may be another question. I won't go off on a tangent on that now, but how do you get someone who's an individual contributor to get little like leadership management sandbox type opportunities to make it so that then when they land into being an actual manager of people, that they've actually done it. And it's not just like, oh, I got some training about this, or I spoke to a mentor over a period of a couple months. Like, that's great, but you want people to actually have tried it and done it and experimented with it and discover the things that they're good at and natural with, and the things that they need to get feedback with, so that when they land in, it's not being sort of thrown into the deep end. How did I do with that? Any
I think
follow-ups?
yeah, I
Okay.
mean, I have some follow-ups, but Marissa, I'm gonna let you take this one. What makes a good leader? Like, what are we trying to get them to do? What's our goal?
Yeah, I think someone who's willing to be open, honest, to be able to say what they know, what they don't know. I think that vulnerability is quite important, and that doesn't mean necessarily oversharing or, you know, sharing all the confusion that might be going on in the brain, but saying, "Look, I'm here. I'm a real human. I'm I'm working towards this, and I want to bring you along." I think those are the qualities that really make, in my view, effective leaders.
Okay. So, well, like whatever everyone's homework item is going to be is to identify somebody in your team who wants to be a leader, who wants to be able to grow, and set up a time to talk to them and help them be able to develop. So that gets back to your point, Adam, is how do we develop these leaders?
Yeah, it's a good one. I mean, I think, yeah, I was actually just coaching someone on something related to this, so I'll go kind of specific for a moment, but maybe it can be generalized. Um, so there's somebody who has in a team, so someone I'm coaching in an organization who has a stated intent and desire to be a leader, and that's clear. Uh, and now this person is kind of saying, okay, what do I do to grow into that role and like really engaging with their manager to figure that out. And one of the great things they figured out is to have him mentor someone else in the team and identify things that that person could really use feedback on. And because one of the most important things for a leader to be able to do is to like uh, really take an interest in someone from a place of caring and from a place of understanding, how they can reach their goals, and then and what are their goals, and then saying, how can I give them that feedback, even when it's tough, even when it's really hard to say that they're not doing the things that they need to perform or meet their goals. That this gives this person an opportunity to work with someone else who they don't manage, but observe their growth areas and work with them, and then because they're working hand in hand, he can give her that feedback and he can grow that skill, that really specific skill about feedback and leaning into some of those tough conversations. So that's one specific thing that I think is a really central leadership skill. That is one way to do that. It's kind of a bigger question. So I want to just stop there, and if maybe we can pass to someone else, or if you have other follow-up questions, feel free to let me know.
Yeah, well, whichever panel members can also contribute to what are the most important skills a leader needs to have? Ways or perspectives or way of thinking or the way the organization is looking at leadership. And this might just get into the culture, which we can jump into next. But Riza, Kristen, Tanya, Ashley, do either of you have a thought you want to comment on that? If not, we can just move on to culture because I think the culture really supports that.
I was gonna say the quick thing I have to say is I think it comes down, we talked a little bit about vulnerability to knowing themselves. I think to be a really good leader, you have to know yourself, you have to be self-reflective, you have to be willing to call out your strengths, but call out the things that maybe you're not as strong in and be willing to delegate those things to others on your team. Like you have to realize you can't always be the be all end all. And so I think it's really knowing yourself. And so that's one area I'm not a big like as an HR consultant, like, oh, take all the assessments you can take. But I do find if you have someone who's going to become a leader, some of the assessments that are out there, whether it's DISC or MBTI or Six Working Geniuses, I mean, there's a lot of different assessments people can take to try to get to really know themselves. Because I think once you know yourself, it's a lot easier to work with others and to it's a lot easier to give feedback to people. To Adam's point, if you're giving direct feedback, difficult feedback to others, you should be able to give that same feedback to yourself too and say, you know what, this might not be my strength, or this is something I need to work on. So it's really creating self-awareness.
So a lot of it, Tanya, you were going to say something.
Eh, Up to you.
You definitely can. Then we're just going to move on to culture.
Well, I was just going to throw out, I mean, it depends on how you think of leader. Are you thinking of like, are they driving the entire organization, or are they a manager within the organization? Um, if you're talking about managers, one thing that I'll just throw out there is, aside from all the skill building that's very much required, like what you all have talked about, we also find that new managers sometimes just need like some like very explicit um, expectations about how they're using their time. So, for example, setting expectation around, you should have weekly or biweekly one-on-ones, and here's what a one-on-one is, and here's a one-on-one agenda template. Once a quarter, ideally, you are helping your team members think about, pause and reflect on what's their individual learning development plan. Once a month, you should be doing metrics or whatever, success check. So sometimes just I think organizations, in an effort to give their managers a lot of freedom and autonomy, overdo it. Where I find that a lot of, especially new managers, need some of those really specific tools and expectations. And then maybe as they become more experienced and confident, they can play around and do things in their own ways. But not just the skills, but the very specific behaviors that are expected, I think is very, very helpful.
I like that point. Thank you. That is very helpful. So
Yeah, I would give a
basically,
huge +1 to that as well. I thought that was an outstanding answer.
thanks. All right. So moving on to culture, we have another poll for you. And that if you were going to design your ideal organizational culture, what word would you choose? Now, the words we chose here are all good examples of things I have heard. Well, I've heard many examples over the years of cultures I wouldn't encourage, and others that I would encourage, but these are probably ones that are really, I think we've been hearing this theme throughout, that if they're authentic, if they're respectful, if they're supportive of you, if you feel psychologically safe. And I think psychological safety is probably one of the biggest things that we keep coming back to. I like the purposeful, that we know what we're doing. That goes back to our value proposition. Everybody feels that they're part of a collaborative entity. So these are all really great words that you can try to aspire to. Okay, so culture can feel very abstract, right? So let's say we want to have a supportive culture. That seems 35% of respondents want that. How do you make a culture be something tangible, and how do you know if you're succeeding with that? So, Amruza, is that something that you'd like to take?
I have a lot of thoughts about that, but I'm probably not the best person to answer on that.
Okay. Adam?
Yeah, sure. I can jump in on that. Yeah, I think culture is abstract uh, if you haven't uh, done things like try to tie it to the impact or tie it to what happens when you have a really strong culture or healthy culture, psychologically safe culture. And it's also abstract on the other side, but it's like, well, what do I actually do? What are the things that I can do to then create the culture, which then gets the high performance? To be clear, a psychologically safe culture is tied to high performance. There's just like evidence out there about this. I won't go into that, but the core idea is that if people at the in the work environment feel like they can uh, give tough feedback, challenge the status quo, um, have debates, have disagreements, have their voice heard, be creative or take a risk. These kinds of organizations are the ones where the best ideas come out. It's like a marketplace of ideas. People can just say what's on their mind, talk it out, and then they tend to innovate and they tend to create a feeling of well-being in the people that are there because they do feel supported. They feel like, okay, I'm not going to be shamed. I'm not going to be humiliated in front of everyone. I can just say this thing. And so there's this really, really powerful effect that can be achieved that absolutely ties to performance. And then the next question is sort of like, okay, well, what do you actually do? And there's a bunch of different behaviors that can create a psychologically safe culture, and it like really depends on the organization. I could start throwing things out there. I probably will throw a couple things out there, but it's like so dependent on like the people leading the org and kind of where they are. I would say some of the like really basic behaviors that I see people kind of skip over often, where they can sort of go back to basics and say, oh, here's going to be a way to like really set a firm groundwork, would be something like, how much do people socialize? How much do people make an effort to just like chat about things that aren't so like constantly work related? Like as a leader, do you know what people really love doing? Do you know enough about them to be able to say, yeah, what they like doing outside of work and kind of what gives them their identity, those sorts of things, is really taking an interest in people. It creates threads of trust, and then that starts to form a basis for teamwork, because trust is so tied to teamwork. That's one, and then another one I'll just throw out is how much are the really high performers recognized for the great things that they're doing. So, it can be so demotivating to feel like you're doing a great job and getting all this impact, and then the leaders aren't saying anything to you or to anyone, or even worse, they're taking credit for it. And it's just like, that's terrible, right? But if you really recognize excellence all the time, praise publicly, make sure that things are not skipped over, tied to the impact of what the person did to the performance of the team and the customers, then you're going to see more trust start to build up. So those are just a couple really base behaviors. There's more, but I have been speaking now for a few minutes, so I want to pause there and pass to someone
Thank you.
else.
And I'm just recognizing our time also. Tanya, people very now are working in a hybrid culture. People are remote all over the place. So how do we make a good culture when we have a distributed workforce?
Um, I want to answer your question, but I also want to answer your other question. Can I try to do
Okay.
both very
You can do
efficiently?
both of them. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So maybe first I'll just add, I feel like I'm like the definition police today, but I'll throw out maybe how I think about culture or how I found
Okay.
it useful to think about culture. I think there's culture, which is like what is distinct about us. So culture is what is normal here, like what are our ways of doing things. And there's elements of culture, which is, what are our values and how do we bring them to life? And how is that distinct from every other organization? That distinctiveness, I think, is quite important because it helps you attract the right people and it helps you detract the people who won't be a great fit for that organization. I've sometimes heard values referred to as like hot sauce. Some people should love it and some people should be like, oh, that's not for me. Um, so I think there's like what's distinct about your organization. And that should be ideally tied to what is the purpose of your organization? What are you trying to achieve? What research shows is that the more people feel aligned with the organization's value, the more committed the organization's values with their values, the more committed and passionate they are about it. And then there's like organizational health, like psychological safety, Adam, that you're talking about. Like ideally, that's in every organization. I can't think of an organization that's like, no, psychological safety won't be good for you. So I think there's sort of in general, we want to be respectful, we want to be supportive, and so much of that is what Adam talked about. So much of it is just asking your organization, your team, hey, what is it like? What's working? What's not working? What would make you feel respected? What would make you feel supported? And then there's the distinct value stuff. So, for example, maybe you're an organization that deeply values learning in a really intense way. And you expect that everyone who's here, they're always going to be learning, they're always going to be teaching. And so you want to take that value and embed it in terms of what it looks like when it is practiced. And then you want to think about what does it look like when it's violated. And then you want to embed it really specifically in your hiring process, in your onboarding process, in your assessment process, all that kind of stuff.
Thank you.
And then to quickly touch on how do you do it in a hybrid world, the same exact way you would do it in an all remote world versus in an all in-person world. I think just even more deliberately, making sure you're being really explicit about this stuff. You probably don't have walls where you can like put announcements and values. So how do you find different communication channels? And then to Adam's point, there probably need to be more ways to connect both one-on-one in small groups and in large groups.
Thanks, Tanya. So everyone's homework for today for that particular one, is going to be what I think is like of a culture log. Just observe. We know what our culture wants to be. Just at the end of the day, think about, did we do anything that strengthened what our intentional culture is? Did we do anything to weaken the intentional culture? And just observing, I think, can often times just bring about the change that you want to be because you're just noticing that. Now, really had 10 minutes slotted for Q&A, but we are at time, which we're very happy to answer questions. First, I want to do is just put a quick poll about just feedback about this particular session. If it gave you actionable information, recommend it. This is completely anonymous, so we would definitely love your responses to this. And if anybody has any questions for our panelists, now is the time to ask them. You can either put it in the chat or you can start speaking, whichever one's most helpful for you.
I would like to ask a quick question if that's
Yes,
okay.
absolutely.
So I think the question was like, as a nonprofit grows in size, so we are about 60, but I was thinking like maybe a little smaller than that at that size and larger. To be very frank, we still don't have all the systems in place, and we constantly think about how do we prioritize the different systems and like going deeper in some areas versus having baseline in different areas. So do you all have any guidance to like, as organizations scale in size, what's appropriate at what size?
That's a good question. All right, which panelist wants to answer?
Just to clarify, you said you're at 60 people currently and you're growing
Yes.
you're about to grow. And is your structure, like what's your organizational design? Is it like kind of a traditional hierarchy or is it some other model?
Super quickly. So like a large part of the 60 people, I would say 3/4 are like the implementation program side team, which is most people are like the direct field workers, and then there's some manager. And as of now, there's directly the co-founder. We are trying to add a level there. And then the remaining are like everything else, miscellaneous, which is pretty, like there's not too many levels there.
So just some quick thoughts on my end. In terms of just looking at organizational health, you're definitely at a size where if you're not already doing it, doing some kind of engagement survey, maybe twice a year, will give you a sense of like what's breaking and what, where do I need more attention and what's working really well and how can we learn from what's working well. So doing an engagement survey where you can parse the data by team, by tenure, by department, that could be really helpful. Typically at around your size, for most organizations, what tends to happen is more siloing. Communication starts to get harder. So starting to really think through what are some kind of like what I mentioned earlier, like what are our different communication channels? How can we have different spokespeople sharing the same message in different ways? How do we create cross-organizational alignment and communication and sense of togetherness? So maybe that's like at my last organization, we used to do this thing probably when we got to around that size where every month there would be like an opportunity for a team to share what does a day in their life look like? What are they working on? What are they celebrating? Um, so yeah, the communication clarity, the preventing siloing by having really clear connection. And probably the third thing is you'll often start to see motivation start to go down a little bit at that point because people don't feel quite as much of a sense of, I know how I'm making an impact. So really investing in whatever it is your organization does, like put the impact that you're making front and center. And show people, especially in the nonprofit world, it's so critical to understand how does my specific job achieve our goals and our mission. And sometimes it's just like once a quarter, let's pause and talk about what we've achieved, or is it an opportunity for whoever the benefactors are of your work to be more visible? But yeah, I would say like meaning, connection, and communication tend to break down as we move from around the 50 to around the 100-person mark.
Thank you. All right, any other questions before we let everybody go? All righty. The one takeaway I just want you to be thinking about is what are you going to be doing differently this week to becoming a stronger leader and to support your team? And thank you all for joining, especially to our panelists. I'm going to be sending out a link to the recording, a link to Laura's notes, and a summary of what your action items are. And I'll be following up next week also to see how that progressed. So holding you accountable, making change, making you all stronger leaders and developing stronger workplaces. So thank you all for joining. And we'll see you all next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.